The real news about the Tucson economy is that we are back on track. We're generating solid rates of job, population, and income growth. Those growth rates are right in the neighborhood or even better than the national average. We're also carrying that momentum from last year into this year, and it looks like 2018 is even going to be stronger than 2017. Now, the sectors that are generating the most job growth are healthcare, professional and business services, which includes all kinds of activity from accountants and lawyers to engineers, computer scientists, and also the call center sector. Also seeing strong growth in the tourism sector and also a real rebound in construction activity. It's been reflected both in jobs and in housing permit activity. So those are kind of where the growth has been concentrated, but really all sectors of the Tucson economy are contributing to job and overall economic growth. Well, what's growing a bit slower these days is trade. Competition between brick and mortar stores and online stores still matters. Somewhat slower growth in government, some of the other sectors, but really Tucson is doing very well these days, and really all sectors are contributing at least a little bit to overall growth. Income and population growth are also doing very well. We added about 8,000 net new residents last year. I think we'll do the same this year and into 2019 as well. And that basically matches up with the job growth that we're seeing. Income growth last year was actually unusually good. It was well above the national average, about double the growth rate we saw in 2016. So what we're seeing is job growth that is combined with relatively tight labor markets, and we're finding that employers are really having to compete for workers at the same time that the state's minimum wage is rising. And all that's contributing to really solid income growth, population growth, and job growth. They're kind of all going on at the same time. Yeah, Tucson is doing really well. We're firing on all cylinders, and that momentum is going to carry us from 2018 into 2019. Once we get into 2020, things are really going to slow down, and that's being driven by a slowing national economy, in part because of the federal fiscal stimulus that really contributed to growth in 2018. That'll start to die off in 2019 and especially in 2020, and we'll see growth nationally and in Tucson and Arizona-wide really slow down in 2020 and through kind of the early part of the next decade. We also have demographic changes that are really continuing to bite, and those will also be contributing to slower growth as we get into the first part of the next decade. Well, a recession is a concern at this point, particularly one beginning at the end of 2019 and into 2020. At this point, that's still a relatively low probability event, probably less than a 25% probability of a recession starting in 2019. The odds are for continued growth over the next couple of years, both nationally and in Tucson, or even somewhat faster growth than we see under the baseline. But this is the part of the business cycle where we want to start to think about the risks of recession, particularly as we see that federal fiscal stimulus starting to dissipate and overall economic growth being slowed for demographic reasons. There are a couple things that are starting to combine. If a trade war were to become much more salient, much more impactful than it has been so far, that would also contribute. Basically, when we see overall economic growth slowing, it makes policy mistakes much more relevant.